Welcome back to the Classic Cultures channel and another college football preview video. Today we're going to be previewing the LSU Tigers. But before we get into LSU, just a reminder, we do have an active giveaway that ends tomorrow, so it's not too late to enter that. Head over to the Florida State video and the rules are in the description, as well as the first 30 seconds or so. Those of you who are new to the channel, please do us a huge favor and subscribe. We've been growing the channel tremendously. We love the feedback we're getting from you guys in the comment section and all that good stuff. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and talk about the LSU Tigers. So, Dad, what do you have in store for them in your preview for them this season?
Yeah, this could be a big year for LSU. With Jaden Daniels coming back, and we've seen what he did last year, almost 3,000 yards passing, almost 1,000 yards rushing, and you've seen him literally take over certain games. And then they just return a lot. They return Josh Williams as a running back, Noah Kane. They return Malik Neighbors as their number one receiver, 1,000-yard receiver. And then I like what they did in the transfer portal, especially on defense. So LSU really could be both a national championship contender. Jaden Daniels, I expect to be in the Heisman race. Now, again, whether he cracks the code, whether he's actually invited to New York, I'm not sure, but I expect him to be one of the most exciting players in college football next year. And I wouldn't be surprised if he did get invite to New York. And I expect LSU to be in the thick of the SEC race, and wouldn't be surprised if they were able to pull out winning the SEC West and maybe even a playoff berth. This team has that much talent. Now, obviously, the SEC is loaded, as we know. So as we look at their schedule, there's some games there. There's some games to be concerned about. Obviously, we're talking about Alabama and some of these other games, but they have the talent. Between what they're returning, between LSU recruiting at a high level, Brian Kelly, a very high level coach, and then what they got in the transfer portal, this is the year that LSU should make that. And I don't want to say turn because they were in the race last year.
They were definitely in the race last year.
But I think everybody who kind of saw them in the race kind of felt, especially a team with 2 losses, 3 losses, which isn't really turning into 4 losses, really saw them on the outside looking in. This may be a year where for most of the season they're on the inside and have an inside track, especially as I suspect that Alabama is going to have a little bit of a down year. So, yeah, this is a very talented team. What's your thoughts?
No, they are very talented, but I'm going to start off by saying this video – it was a few videos ago as well. It might have been the Tennessee video or the Notre Dame one, but this was a kind of a tricky one for me. The reason being, they did bring back a lot of starters. Offensively, they brought back 9 of 11 starters. Obviously, we talked about Jaden Daniels, almost 3,000 yards passing, 17 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions, almost 1,000 yards rushing, 11 touchdowns on the ground. So yes, I mean he's a hell of a talent. But I don't know if it's going to be enough. And not to like diminish LSU's light by any means for the LSU fans who are going to see this video, but I just feel like last year was kind of a bit of an anomaly. The only reason I have a floor and a ceiling for them, which we'll get to later in the video. Now, do I think they can compete for the SEC West? I do believe that. I probably still, though, at this point, favor Alabama over them. I think it'll be a good game, but I just think Nick Saban, like I said in the Alabama video, he's a great coach. I don't think I can really bet against him. So it's kind of hard. They do play a really tough schedule, obviously starting off of Florida State. And those of you who are in the Florida State video, like I said, go check out the giveaway. But in that video, I actually have Florida State winning that game. In the comment section, I kind of went back and forth with a lot of LSU fans in that video, as well as Florida State fans. And we kind of had good football dialogue when it came to like why is it that I chose Florida State over LSU. Like I said, a lot of LSU fans were kind of coming at me in that video, but it's more so I just believe in Jordan Travis a little bit more than Jaden Daniels. The reason being LSU is going to be a great team, but defensively they're going to look a lot different, especially on the back end. They lost Keyshawn Booty, however you say his name. They lost him. And he was widely considered their best offensive weapon outside the quarterback, obviously Jaden Daniel, but he was a top 5 receiver last year. I know he had some injury concerns and stuff like that, and he sat out, and a lot of weird stuff was going on. But other than that, he was probably their best player on offense, like I said, outside of Jaden Daniels. But defensively, they're going to look a lot different. But I will say this, even though sort of my first 2-minute rant or so kind of has been negative in a sense, I guess you'd say, I still think that they're going to compete for the SEC West. But I think as of right now, Harold Perkins is my preseason pick for Defensive Player of the Year. He's a demon. Those of you guys who watched a few games last year, I think he was a true freshman last year. He was an absolute beast. So I have him winning the Nagurski this year. If we did a preseason award list, I would have him winning that. The offensive line was terrible last season. They gave up 45 sacks to Jane Daniels. It probably should have been more, but he was just so mobile. I mean, he's an athletic quarterback. He was able to get out a lot of those situations, but they gave up 45 sacks. They brought back 4 of the 5 starters, but how good can those 4 guys be? Can they develop into, better college football SEC type linemen, which I'm sure they can. There's a 4s and 5 stars, but they were terrible last year. And team wise, LSU as a whole pretty much finished in 5th or 6th, middle of the pack in every team total statistical category last year. You're talking about total points per game, offense and defense, rushing, offense and defense, passing, offense and defense. Literally 5th or 6th in the entire conference. So that scares me a little bit, just because when you're talking about a team who has national championship aspirations, you have to it's okay to be average at everything, but you have to be elite at something as well. And when you're, 5th and 6th in your conference, that's not even including any other, top powerhouse team. Again, you're playing with the Tennessees, the Georgias, the Alabamas of the world. But at the end of the day, you have to line up and beat them if you want to get to the playoffs. And when you're, a middle of the road team in your own conference, I just don't see how that's going to happen. And like I said earlier, I do have a floor and a ceiling for them, which we'll get to here in a second. But what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll pull up the schedule for you guys now, so you guys can kind of see it while I talk about the floor and ceiling aspect. So, like I said in the Florida State video, I do have Florida State winning that game. And then the only other kind of, I guess you'd say, concerning games for them are going to be maybe Ole Miss. I think that game is going to be competitive. It's in Oxford, so they're not going to have home field advantage. You play against Alabama, which is at Alabama. Florida might be a decent game. I do expect Florida to be down this year, but I still think it's going to be a somewhat competitive game. And then I think the A&M game is going to be competitive. And some of you guys in the comments might think I'm crazy for saying that. But I do think by that point in the season, A&M is going to be somewhat of a complete football team. They're going to kind of have their training wheels off. Hopefully Jimbo, rights the ship this year, and that's a competitive game. I probably still favor LSU. Don't get me wrong, but I do think it's going to be competitive. So again, I have Alabama beating them, and I have Florida State beating them, and I still think Ole Miss is a swing game. I think Florida's a swing game, and I think A&M is a swing game. I have them as the ceiling 11-1, the floor being 8-4. They're in a fault somewhere being in there. Go ahead.
See, where I would disagree is I say the ceiling, I would have to go 12-0. I think they can beat Florida State, and I suspect that Alabama is going to be a little bit down. To me, that Florida State game is a toss-up. It could go either way, and I wouldn't be shocked. Now, I agree with your floor. There are some other games they could definitely lose in there. Mississippi State has been known to have some great seasons. Arkansas can be tough. Like you mentioned, Ole Miss, Auburn, we never know what you're going to get with Auburn. Florida is still a big name in college football. But like I said, I like what this team did. I like what they added. In the secondary, Deuce Chestnut, Zai Alexander, I like the moves. And then to your point, yes, they were not necessarily great on offense last year, but returning that much of the offense, right? You mentioned Butte being the second best offensive weapon, but statistically he wasn't. And like I said, you do have a 1,000-yard receiver in Malik Neighbors. Now, I don't think they had a great running game outside of Jaden Daniels, but you bring back all 3 of your top running backs. You just assume, and obviously we know assuming can be quite negative, but you just assume they all are going to take a step up, right? You mentioned poor line play last year, but they bring back 4 or 5 linemen, right? You assume, you hope, you have to have belief in that those 4 players that are returning are going to take a step up and be a little bit better. So that part of that helps me believe. Again, a 10-4 team that was in the race to win the SEC, literally in the SEC championship game last year, which was probably a year early. This is the year that they should see a maturation of some of that talent that they have. They should be better this year than they were last year, just based on what they're returning. And like I said, some of the players that they got in the transfer portal. And if they were able to go 10-4 last year, I suspect that, yeah, I would have them if I kind of tossed up the Florida State and Alabama game and said, hey, they probably win one and lose one. I have them comfortably at 11-1. But like I said, I think their ceiling has to be 12-0, and I would say probably the floor is about 8-4 if some things went wrong and they lost to a couple of other good SEC teams.
Well, so I will say this: the reason why I had the ceiling at 11-1 and not 12-0 is it's not so much who they're playing, but it's also where they're playing. I feel like the three toughest opponents on their schedule are all away games. And I think that's going to play a major factor. I think LSU, I mean, Death Valley, we're talking about the real Death Valley. But, LSU's Death Valley is pretty good as well. But, I mean, they have arguably the best home field advantage in all of college football. And the three games that are really going to be mattering the most in Florida State, Ole Miss, and Alabama are all going to be away games. So I think that
the Florida State game is a neutral site game, but
I mean it's in Orlando, so yeah. I mean I consider that an away game. I would assume that it's going to be more Florida State heavy, but just those games, I don't think they're going to win all three, and that's why I said they're ceiling. Now I get what you're saying, ceiling being 12-0 because they do have the talent to do that. I wouldn't be surprised if they went 12-0. So let me go ahead and say that now. I would not be surprised, but I also would not be surprised if they went 8-4. I think again. Now I'm going to push back on you here. I don't think Jaden Daniels is going to be in the Heisman conversation. The reason why, I think there's a lot of really good players. And I think there's going to be a lot of players that have better seasons than him. He did not have a bad season by any means. He was very good at taking care of the football. Only 3 picks last year on a team that really wasn't superbly talented like a lot of the other quarterbacks had. When you're talking about Hooker, when you're talking about Caleb Williams. So, I mean, even CJ Stroud. So I think I don't see him going to New York. Now, I think he's a top quarterback in the country. I think he's a top player in the country next year. But I think there's so much talent when you're talking about the Heisman level, when you're talking about running backs and quarterbacks. I don't see him getting that nod. But again, I would not be surprised if they went 12-0. I think the Florida State and the Alabama game are both swing games. I just favor the other two teams. That's all. So before everybody comes to my neck, again, this is probably the most disrespectful I've been towards the team, but I really feel like I'm being pretty fair. And I mean, I just think it can go either way. And that's just me being completely honest.
I say this from if LSU is good. Now, Jaden Daniels is probably going to put up plus 3,000 yards, plus or right around 1,000 yards rushing.
Yeah.
If they are a contender, especially in the SEC, if they do go 12-0, or even if they go 11-1 and have a close loss to Alabama or Florida State and are still in the race for the SEC championship, if they're still in the playoff race, right, that record may be what helps Jaden Daniels. And like I said, I suspect that he's going to have a pretty good year. You're right. There's a lot of talent. And so when I'm mentioning these, I am not yet ready to say, hey, these are the 4 or 5 guys.
No, I got you.
I see it. New York, I'm just saying that he could be there.